Hello, everybody. So excited to be part of this incredible Torah learning Beit Midrash that's opened for 24 hours. And I think there is no better way than to really bring in the light at this time as much as possible by learning Torah. I'm going to go right into things and I'm going to talk about Beit Shammai's view. I called it Illuminating Beit Shammai's view on Chanuka lights, and soon I'll share the screen and bring in some sources about this. But I want to take 1 minute to explain why I decided to talk about Beit Shammai's view, Davka. Generally, we know, of course, that we go by Beit Hillel when there's a machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. But I think there's something incredibly important Dafka to understanding the side and the view that we don't go by halakhically. When we learn, even in Mishnah, that a lot of times the views that we don't necessarily go by, but for sure, as we learn the discussions that are in the Gemara, and when we learn more in depth and more intensely the halakha, we see in general how many machlokot, how many disputes there are amongst the different sages and the different commentators and the different poskim up until our day. And I think especially how important it is to understand the other view. Part of the importance of learning Torah in general, learning Torah in depth, learning Gemara, learning Mishnah, learning different views, and definitely learning halakha and the halakhic discussion, is being able to know how to form healthy relationships and healthy disputes. That's something that we learn through Torah. We see that there's different views. It's incredible to have different views. That's actually how we get to the light of Torah and how we understand things more. And the different views a lot of times sharpen, don't necessarily change our view, but they definitely sharpen our understanding and our views, challenge them and sharpen them. So I think in general, in terms of forming relationships, obviously everyone has relationships with everybody they know. We don't live in a vacuum, and thank God, whether it's with our parents, our children, our friends, our people at work, people we see, other family members, or really anyone, colleagues. We have to form healthy relationships, which means we have to be able to listen to another person and understand their view on anything it is. So I want to open up today, getting closer to Chanuka and to Chanuka lights. And I want to try to understand a little bit Beit Shammai's view. So I'm going to share for a minute some sources. Tanu Rabbanit, it says Masechet Shabbat, which in itself is a whole interesting thing. How there's no tractate Masechet on Chanuka. And if we were just going to think about all the different tractates there are and where Chanuka should be placed, we might come thinking about different things. We'll see the very strong relation between Chanuka and Sukkot, and we might have thought that it could have been in as part of Masechet Sukkah. Maybe for other reasons, we might have thought it could be part of Masechet Ta'anit, as a time that we don't actually say eulogies, nor do we fast, and maybe it could be part of that. But the focus actually became later on that Chanuka is the time of lighting, and not just the Chanukat HaMizbeach and making the Mikdash and the altar pure again. And it became really a focus on the lights. And possibly that's why it's a Masechet Shabbat, which also has a big focus on the lights and the Shlom Beit at home. In Masechet Shabbat, it says, Tanu Rabbanit, Mitzvat Chanuka ner ishu beito. Okay, the mitzvah on Chanuka is to light ner ishu beito. It's enough to have one light at home per family, meaning the entire family can have just one every single night, and that would be fine. The mehadrin, people who want to do this, enhance the mitzvah in a more beautiful way, mihudar, ner lekol echad ve'echad. Okay, that would mean that every single person at home would light one. Mehadrin min ha-mehadrin, which is what we're all likely to do today. Then it becomes a dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai says, Yom HaRishon, on the first day, 8. And then every single day, Mikam ve'elach pochet ve'holech, little by little you go less and less. And Beit Hillel said, Yom HaRishon, the first day, we light 1, like we do. Mikam ve'elach mosif ve'holech. And you just continue to light more each day. Amar Ula said, Plige Batrei Amoraei b'Ma'arava. Ma'arava is in Eretz Israel. Two Amoraim, two sages from the times of the Gemara, they had a dispute as to what the dispute is in terms of the logic behind Beit Shamai and Beit Hillel's view. Rabbi Yossi bar Avin and Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida, those are the two sages that had this dispute. Chad amar taima de Beit Shamai k'neged yamim hanichnasim. One said that the reasoning for Beit Shamai is the days that are going to be coming in, the yamim hanichnasim, and it could be not just the days of Chanuka, but the days that are coming in shortly in terms of the days getting longer. And Tama de Beit Hillel, and the reason for Beit Hillel are the days that are already finished, seemingly the days of Chanuka that are already finished, so it also could be darker days that, in terms of getting shorter and shorter until Hanukkah time. The Chadamar, and one said, Tama de Beit Shamai, the reason for Beit Shamai is Keneged Parei HaChag. The reason for Beit Shamai is similar to the Parim, the sacrifice that was brought on Chag HaSukkot, and specifically the bulls that were brought. And in a minute, we'll see what were the bulls that were brought. And time in the Beit Hillel, Ma'alim B'Kodesh ve'en Moridim, that we go up when it comes to Kedusha, and whenever we want to add a holiness, we continue to add and we don't subtract. Amar Rava bar bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shtei Kenim Hayu B'Tzidan. Okay, there were two elders in Tzidan. Echad asa k'Beit Shamai, one did like Beit Shamai, v'echad asa k'divrei Beit Hillel, and one did like Beit Hillel. Obviously, they were doing the most beautifying this mitzvah, like it says, Mahadrim and Hamedrim. And זה נותן דם לדבריו, כנגד פרי החג, וזה נותן טעם לדבריו, דמלים בקודש ואין מורידים. Meaning, it's true, we had two different reasonings before this, but now the main reasoning became that Beit Shammai's view was because it was like the bulls that were brought as a sacrifice on Sukkot, and Beit Hillel's view had to do with going up in terms of Kedusha and in terms of holiness and not taking away from Kedusha. Okay, so I'm going to start with Beit Hillel just because I think it's pretty simple to understand this idea of adding Kedusha and adding holiness. Something that we see not only on Hanukkah, but we see it as a general rule. The truth of the matter is this is not a Beit Hillel rule. This is a rule in general. Ma'alim b'kodesh ve'en moridim. Whenever you have something holy, you can always add holiness, but you can't take away. One of the most famous ones in terms of adding holiness is found in Masechet Megillah. Okay, the Mishnah there talks about Masechet Megillah about when you have something holy, how you can change something from a certain level of holiness into something even holier, but you can't do the opposite. So, for instance, if there was a city, Bnei Ha'ir, they decided to sell the Chovah Shel Ir, okay, a certain courtyard outside of the city, they could take the money from that and they could build a Beit Knesset, they could build a shul with it, okay? And if they sold for whatever reason, or they got money off of a Beit Knesset, of a shul, obviously they would have to build another one first before taking down the first one, but let's say they had money from that, they could take something even more holy, which would be a teva, okay, and a place to put in the Torah, which has a certain larger amount of holiness because it's closer to the Sefer Torah, but not as close as the Mitzpachot, which really covers the Sefer Torah even more. All this, though, is a little bit less holy than the Sfarim, even the Chumashim, things that have, each Chumash that has Shem Hashem and holiness to it, even a higher level than just the things that are covering the Sefer Torah. So you could sell all those things and buy with it Chumashim, which we call Sfarim. And you could also sell the Chumashim in order to be able to afford a Sefer Torah. But says the Mishnah, Aval imachru Torah, if for whatever reason they sold the Sefer Torah, which of course is not allowed to do except for in very, very certain circumstances, so that people can maybe to marry certain people who don't have the money for it because they're orphans or in very, very extenuating circumstances. But normally that wouldn't happen. But if it did happen, you wouldn't be able to take that money and buy Chumashim. nor would you be able to take money from selling chumashim and to buy something that would need bachot that's covering Torah because it's less holy and farther removed. And continues the Mishnah to say same thing. We'll be able to take the money from selling a Beit Knesset and to buy something that people, the rehov, that people at a courtyard, even if once in a while people pray there, it's not the same thing as Beit Knesset. And says the Mishnah, and this is an important part to talk about, the mutar erehem, which I think happens very often, is that people, have this fundraising event for something, and thank God people are so generous, and they give a lot of money for it, and there's extra, right? So they give a lot of money for buying, let's say, a Sefer Torah, and they bought the most beautiful Sefer Torah you can imagine, and now there's extra money. And what can you buy with that extra money? Because it was originally people were giving that money in order to buy a Sefer Torah. It's not clear that you can take that money and buy anything less holy than a Sefer Torah, unless, of course, halachically, originally it was set for a Sefer Torah and other things at the same time. Okay, so that's in terms of Malim B'Kodesh Ve'en Moridim, and you can't go down in holiness. We see it a few more times also. I just brought a few more examples of it. One is a very long story between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua and other people who were in the Beit Midrash at the time, when Rabban Gamliel, who had tons of respect for all the other rabbis, but was very, very adamant about his halachic opinion in order to not make the Torah into different opinions, and people would sort of get lost at the time. And therefore, he did certain things that ended up seeming to people like it was too degrading to Rabbi Yeshua, and didn't appreciate it enough, and it wasn't respectful enough. And at the time, decided to take down Rabban Gamliel to be Nasi for a certain amount of time until he really apologized to Rabbi Yeshua and went back to being Nasi. In the meantime, when he wasn't this head figure in the Beit Midrash, they had to take somebody else, and they also didn't know how long this was going to be. And they took Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah to be like the Nasi at the time. But then, shortly afterwards, Rabban Gamliel came back to be the Nasi, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah came back to be just one of the sages in the Beit Midrash. On the other hand, the Gemara asks, what should we do? Na'avrei, should we take him down completely from being the Nasi? Gemire, but we've learned, Ma'alim B'Kodesh Ve'en Moridim, meaning we put him in this high position of holiness, we can't just take him down now. Okay? And then they were trying to figure out another way of doing it, and they figured out some kind of rotation that would work well between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. But here too, we see the same idea of you can't just, even in a position, put a person in a position of holiness and then take him down. So we see this was used for two different things so far. One was when something is holy, you can't take that money for that thing and make it into something that's less holy. And the second, even when someone is in a position of holiness, we don't take him down from that position into something less holy. In Masechet Shabbat, we have something similar in terms of tefillin shebalu and sefer Torah shebalu, meaning if somebody has tefillin that the letters are not kosher for tefillin anymore, but you might want to take that cloth and let's say all the letters already were erased, but you still have a kosher cloth, and you might want to take that piece of cloth and parchment and use it for a mezuzah, for instance, and use the Shema Yisrael if the tefillin are not kosher anymore and there was no way of making them kosher. You can't do that. Okay, that's what it says in Masechet Shabbat. You can't say something in a higher level of holiness and make it into a lower level of holiness. Okay, here we're going to summarize just this idea of Malim B'Kodesh Ve'en Moridim. It's a pretty simple idea. We see it throughout different Gemarot and Mishnayot, how it pertains to people and to objects. And in general, when we have something holier, you can't take it down to less holy. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. One question we could ask on Beit Hillel, which we don't necessarily, I don't know if we're going to get into right now, but we could ask, so why not just start the holiest you can? Meaning, why not get to 8, and then the second day do 8, the next day do 8? Meaning, if Beit Shammai is like, let's give it all the first day and do 8, but then they keep going down, and then Beit Hillel is like, that's not a good idea because we don't want less holiness. So why don't we just start with 8, and then the next day we do 8 again, right? I'm not talking about people who don't have enough candles or lights or oil, because they can be enough with just one. They could be Yotze, that mitzvah. But in terms of the Malim B'Kodesh, like, why not start strong and end strong? Just keep going. We won't bring it down at any point. And that's maybe a question on Beit Hillel. Seemingly, the idea of Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin, is taking this mitzvah and enhancing it in the best form that we can. And for this, it seems like the mitzvah we're talking about right now is Pirsumei Nisa, meaning making this miracle so strong and emphasizing it, and bringing that out into the world. And in order to do that, even though you can light one light and it would still be the mitzvah, the fact that we're changing the amounts of lights, whether it's bringing them down or bringing them up, there's something that's changing there, then it maybe enhances the mitzvah even more, because the miracle, people can see and notice the miracle, and every day having something a little bit different. So possibly that's one way of understanding Beit Hillel in terms of why we don't start strong and just keep it 8 every time. Okay, I'm going to move on to Beit Shamai, because of course Beit Shamai didn't disagree with anything here, right? There's no other opinion in the Mishnah, Masechet Megillah. There's no other opinion in Masechet Brachot or in Masechet Shabbat. So I'm going to go on to Keneged Parei HaChag. Beit Shamai says that it is for the bulls that are, it's like the bulls that are brought on Chag HaSukkot. So I'm going to look at that in terms of the sacrifices that are brought on Chag HaSukkot. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why there's this connection to Chag HaSukkot, but which seems pretty clear from other places. If we go into the Chumash in the Sefer Bamidbar, it says, "B'chamishasar yom lechodesh hashvi'i," right, the 15th of the 7th month, which of course is Tishrei. Mikra kodesh yelechem, kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu. V'chagotem chag laHashem shiv'a yamim. You will have these 7 days of chag. We actually have 8 days, of course, of chag, but the 8th day of Shmini Atzeret is its own chag in that sense. Like we see, it says in the Gemara that it has its own chag in a lot of things, and one of them is the korban, right? Kashav. One of them is the korban. V'hikravtem ola isher reach nichoach laHashem. Parim b'nei bakar 13. Okay, so we have the parim b'nei bakar, that's here, 13. Elim ba'ayil 2. The kvasim that we have, which are the sheep, we have 14 tmimim. Okay, so we have the 1-year-olds, b'nei shana, and there are 14 of them. Okay, so first day we have 13 bulls, 2 rams, and 14 sheep. Okay, and then it continues on about the other things that we're bringing along with them. Let's get to the Yom HaSheni, which is in Pasuk Yud Zayin. Yom HaSheni, parim b'nei bakar 12. Okay, it goes down to 12 bulls, and then it keeps the same amount of rams. Elim 2 rams, kvasim b'nei shana 14 tmimim, 14 sheep. Okay, let's go on to the 3rd day, even though there's mincha here and other things, but let's go on to the third day. B'yom HaShlishi, 3rd day of Sukkot. How many bulls are we bringing? 11. How many rams are we bringing? Elim 2, still 2, and the kvasim b'nei shana 14 tmimim, still 14 sheep. Meaning the only thing that's changing here is the bulls. When we continue on, the 4th day, it gets to 10 bulls, still 2 rams, still 14 sheep. Here's the 5th day, it becomes 9 bulls, still 2 rams, and still 14 sheep. And it goes on until the last day, the 7th day before Shmini Atzeret, where we have 7 bulls, 2 sheep, and 2 rams and 14 sheep. Okay, so the rams and the sheep stay the same every single day. And the bulls are the only ones that we're starting off really strong, right? We're getting to 13 from the beginning. We end up with 7. We could do a quick math. We get to 70 altogether in terms of bulls. So that's definitely a lot of bulls. But what's interesting is there's a few things. First of all, we have to figure out why we're comparing this to Sukkot, and why we're making that parallel. And second is, we saw that there's 3 different sacrifices actually that we're bringing on the day of Sukkot. We didn't necessarily have to bring the parim. We didn't have to compare it, right? There's nothing, we're not doing the 13 and then bringing it down to 12 or anything like that. We didn't necessarily have to compare it to the bulls. We could have compared it to the rams or to the sheep, and then it would have stayed the same every day. Maybe we would have gotten to 888, like we had suggested for Beit Hillel. In terms of the connection to Chag HaSukkot, okay, let's read in Sefer Maccabim. Sefer Maccabim, there's 2 Sefer Maccabim, right? There's Sefer Maccabim Aleph and there's Sefer Maccabim Bet. They are what we call Sparim Chitzoniim, that are not part of the Tanakh, maybe simply because they were written afterwards, maybe also for other reasons, but anyway, we don't have them as part of the Tanakh. But they both tell us historically very important things about that time period. They seem to both be written pretty close to the time of the Hashmonaim and Chanuka, even if 56 years later or something like that, still they seem, most people think they were written very quickly afterwards. But there are 2 different books, and they were written probably in 2 different languages, and definitely in 2 different places. So I'm going to go to Maccabim Bet for 1 second, which the original was probably not in Hebrew. And there it says, "V'Maccabim v'anashav asher hinigam Hashem kavshu et hamikdash ve'et ha'ir." So it's telling us a little bit historically how the Maccabim had taken over the temple and the city, v'tiru et hamikdash, and they purified the temple. Asu mizbeach acher, and they made a new altar. Hilhivu et ha'avanim hotziu mehem esh. Heviu korbanot, they brought the sacrifices and the incense, the ketoret, et hanirot, and mecham panim, and this was all very exciting. Mechagegu b'simcha shmona yamim kechag haSukkot, and it already says that this was like Chag HaSukkot, right? I'm reading from here. They celebrated these 8 days like the 8 days of Chag HaSukkot, very similar to that. Why? Because they remembered nifnei zman ma. It wasn't so long before this that bilu et yemei Chag Sukkot beharim ubeme'arot, because before this they were hiding in different caves and they weren't able to celebrate Sukkot like they should. And this holiday almost seemed like this 8-day holiday of Chanuka was for the 8 days that they missed in Chag Sukkot. And afterwards it says, Kavu b'pkuda u'b'gzera dat kulam lekol ha'am ha'Yehudim, and afterwards they decided that this was going to be a yearly thing. Lachug v'temim ele b'kol shana, and it became every single year. Okay, so actually, according to Sefer Maccabim Bet, the reason why we even have 8 days has to do with the Chag HaSukkot. So there's obviously like a big connection to the Chag HaSukkot when it comes to this holiday of Chanuka. One other thing I want to say about the Chanuka and Sukkot and how much they're related to each other is the focus on the temple and the mikdash. So obvious that we have this huge focus on the temple in Chanuka, because the whole focus is basically purifying the mikdash. That's what's happening on Chanuka. But on Sukkot, also the huge focus, if you read all the Mishnayot, what was happening there in the Simchat Beit Shoeva and what was happening throughout all of Sukkot, not only like all the 3 pilgrims, all the Shloshet HaRegalim, is everybody coming up to the Mikdash, but also the focus of the Mikdash, the altar, the Simchat Beit Shoeva, the decorating, I would say, even the altar with the different hadassim and aravot and everything that was going on had so much to do with the Mikdash, and was really one of those holidays that the focus was in the temple. So that's also very connected to that. Now, I guess one question we have to ask is, okay, so 2 things that we figured out. One is, it makes a lot of sense that since there's a huge connection between Sukkot and Chanuka, that we would try to do some kind of learning one from the other. It would make sense that we're learning from the laws of Sukkot, which are straight from the Torah, we're learning things that have to do with Chanuka. Okay, and then I guess the question here is why first of all did the Torah tell us to start so strong with the amount of bulls that we're sacrificing and then go down? How does that make sense? And then second, why did we decide to take the bulls out of all things? Okay, there's a very nice midrash about the differences between the parim, the bulls, and the elim, and the kvasim, and the different sacrifices on Sukkot. And here it says, parim b'nei bakar, mikan, kol makom shekatuv par, ze keneged Avraham. Every time we sacrifice a bull, it's supposed to remind us, supposed to be maybe parallel to or remind us of Avraham, like it says, Shne'emar vel habakar rat Avraham. Okay, because Avraham was taking these bulls for his guests, which we know were the melachim that were coming to him, and that reminds us of Avraham. So there's something special about when we talk about the bulls that it's for Avraham. The ayil is almost quite obviously for Yitzchak, like it says, Vayelech Avraham vayikach et ha'ayil. Okay, so we know that instead of sacrificing his son Yitzchak, he did put him on the altar. Abraham did put him on the altar, but it ended up being the ayil instead, the ram that he took instead of Yitzchak. And the kvasim, the sheep are connected Yaakov, like it says, Vakvasim hifrid Yaakov, and we know that Yaakov had a special way of taking care of the sheep and knew how to so well. And therefore, when we have these three different sacrifices, therefore Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and they basically resemble each one of the Avot. And then I guess the big question is, so why Abraham here? Okay, and it goes on to say, the 13 parim, אתה מוצא ש70 parim היו מקריבים ביום חג הסוכות. Okay, all together we did the math already, that all together we did 70 of the bulls is what we brought on Chag Sukkot as a sacrifice. The first day was 13, and then 12, and then 11, etc. All together was 70. And that is for the 70 different nations of the world. We're sacrificing 70, and it's a utopic number. It doesn't really matter how many nations there are right now, but we talk about the utopic number based on what we read in Bereshit, that there are 70 different nations, so that God should save us from them, and that they should evaporate, like finish, get rid of them in this world, and therefore they get less and less because we want these different nations actually to get very less and less. Okay, I know I'm being recorded, and I know that this is not so politically correct, and we're going to see a source that looks a little bit different, but from this it looks like this is what we want, right? These nations are getting less and less, and therefore we're taking these 70 nations and we're getting less and less, even though of course we do leave it at 7 in the end. But that is a question in terms of why we're getting this less and less. We have an almost opposite approach, I would say. And we have an Echa Rabbah. It says, Amar Rabbi Pinchas, Kol otan 70 parim shehayu Yisrael makrivim b'chag, all these 70 bulls that Am Yisrael would bring on Sukkot were resembling the 70 umot, right, the 70 different nations, so that the world should not be rid of them. Of course, the shelo is in brackets, because it's like, wait, so that the world, we get rid of them or that we don't get rid of them? At least according to this, it's that we do not get rid of them. And kivan shegalum, because Am Yisrael went into galut and they didn't have any more their Beit HaMikdash, hayu umot omrim mi makriv alenu kol otam parim. All the nations would be like, oh, who's going to pray for us? Who is going to sacrifice for us? And essentially what this midrash seems to be saying is the exact opposite of what we read in the last midrash, which is we're doing this for the other Ummat Olam. We want them in this world. We don't want to get rid of them. We want to enhance them here, and we prayed so that they stay here. And it was actually sad for us and for them when the temple was destroyed. There was no one praying for them anymore. The idea of the temple being so related, not just to Am Yisrael, which of course it was, but also to the other nations, comes up when the first temple is being built, and that's in Sefer Melachim. And the very long prayer that Shlomo was saying, he was, amongst other things, explaining that one of the major reasons or jobs of the Mikdash was specifically also for the other nations. And it says here, "Leman yir'ucha kol hayamim asher chayim al pnei hadama asher natata la'avotenu," so that everybody is God-fearing. And that was Am Yisrael, v'gam, and also el anochri asher lo memcha Yisrael hu, and also for the people who are not part of Am Yisrael, v'ba mi'eretz rachoka leman shmecha, they're coming here from a faraway land for your name. That's why they're coming to the temple. Because they will hear your incredible, holy, and great name, and all the amazing miracles that you did, and they'll come to the temple. They're going to come and they're going to pray here. Who's going to pray here? The Nochri. The person who's not Jewish and coming from a faraway land is coming to here, to the temple to pray. אתה תשמע שמיים מחון שבטך, ועשית ככל אשר יקרא לך הנוכרי, למען ידעון כל עמי הארץ את שמך. And essentially part of the purpose for this is also for this people who are not Jewish, so that all the people of the land can learn and know about your name, so that they will also be God-fearing just like Am Yisrael. We're not talking about doing all the mitzvot. We're not talking about getting the Torah. We're talking about just recognizing God, be God-fearing. That is the point of this, that all of Am Yisrael bring the rest of the nations to be God-fearing. And to know that your name is here in this land, in this temple that is being built. It comes up again in Yeshayahu many years later, when Yeshayahu talks about the temple and about the connection between the people who are not Jewish in the temple. And he says, even those who come from other nations and are not Jewish, and they're coming also to serve God. They're coming to love God, and to be his servant. We're not going to get into that now in terms of there being Shomer Shabbat, but they have a love of Hashem, they want to serve Hashem. Machzikim b'briti, meaning they want to be part of this covenant, they want to have a closeness to God. The Haviotim and Halkochi, I'm going to bring them up to my temple, the Simachtim b'Beit Tfilati, and I will make them happy there in my temple, Olotehem v'Zidchehem, and the different sacrifices that they bring, Leratzon HaMizbachi. I will love them, and they will be wanted on the altar. Ki beiti beit tefillah yikare lekol ha'amim, because my house, the temple house, will be called a place for prayer for all the nations. So it's very, very clear that this is supposed to be for all the nations. And interesting that we have, again, I'm just going to try to put these things together. So far, what we saw that there's this connection between Chag Sukkot and Chag Chanuka. And we also saw that particularly the bulls were something that was supposed to resemble all the different nations, the 70 different nations of the world, and how we're sacrificing them. And it's unclear if we're sacrificing so that they get less, or we're sacrificing so that they never leave this world and that they continue to be on. And I think actually, ironically, that both of that is true. We're actually sacrificing these bulls both to bring the other nations in, but also to bring something of them down. It's not the nations that we're trying to get rid of, but it is their avodat zarah, their idolatry, their not being God-fearing. That part we're trying to sacrifice in terms of getting rid of, and we're starting with tons of bulls, and we're trying to get less and less so that there's less of that in the world. What we don't want to get rid of is the rest of the nations, meaning we want them there. We just want them to be God-fearing and to be closer to God and loving God and wanting to serve God, even if it doesn't mean, of course, we're not trying to make them Jewish or to bring them the Torah in that way, but we do want them to be God-fearing and to recognize God's awesomeness and place and temple, And that's really part of it. So when we go back for 1 second and we see how we start with the tons of bulls, and the bulls are really for all the different nations, and that's going to go back to Abraham soon. And then we start with like 13 and we go down to 12, 11, 10, 9. Seemingly this idea of going down is because when we want to bring in this idea of Yirat Shamayim, of God-fearingness, of the Beit, of this convent with Hashem, and just God's incredible name, we start really strong, like we bring a ton of that. And the reason why we get less and less is not because we're getting less Kedusha, but because there's more Kedusha in the world, in the outside world. Very similar to light in general. When does it become irrelevant to have any kind of, small lights, the candles or anything? Is when there's a ton of lights outside, which is also why we do, the B'dik Hachametz with a candle at night, because during the day, obviously, there's tons of light outside. We're not going to need that candle. And the only time it can really shine its light is when it's all dark outside. But when it's really light outside, it's not needed as much. And seemingly what happens is, in the very, very beginning of the Chag, of Sukkot, we need tons of Kedusha. We need tons of Avraham, which we're going to talk about anyway, which is Palim, right? We need tons of that Par, which resembles Avraham and Avraham's whole being. We bring that in very, very strong. And as time goes by, even though the Yitzchak and Yaakov ones stay the same, Avraham gets less and less. Not because Avraham is getting less, but because what he stands for and what he says is brought out to the rest of the nations, is brought out so loud and clear that we need it less on the altar. We can bring less and less on the altar because it means that there's more and more outside. Interestingly, the days actually, according to Chazal, I don't know if this is exact, precise into the day, but Chanuka is supposed to be a time where the light outside starts to get greater. The days start to get longer, as opposed to before when they were getting shorter, they start to get longer. And it's interesting how that's very similar, because as we progress during the Chag, the days are supposed to continuously get longer. There's actually an interesting midrash of the Adam HaRishon, who made this holiday, this 8-day holiday, because he originally fasted, thinking that the days are just getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and eventually that will be the destruction of the world. So he decided to fast, and then at some point he saw that the days were getting longer, and he made an 8-day celebration. Okay, just a side point on that, but let's go back to Abraham. In order to figure out why we're doing something that Dafka resembles Abraham with the Parim, we have to see a little bit of Abraham's character, which comes up so much in all the parshiot that we were just reading. Vayikra Sham b'Shem Hashem El Olam. Okay, this is a pasuk that actually is a few times when Abraham is making an altar. He is putting on an altar, a sacrifice, and there it says he called out the name of Hashem. Amar Reish Lakish explains, this is a very famous way of doing a drasha, is that you say al tikri. Al tikri is one tool in saying a drasha, is that you take a verse, and in order to better explain the verse, obviously don't take away the plain meaning of the verse, but you say, don't read it, meaning don't only read it like this, read it also in another way, and we call that al tikri. So Reish Lakish says, al tikri vayikra, Ela vayakri. What's the difference in Hebrew between vayikra and vayakri? One is called vayikra, and the other one is made other people call out. Melamed, and we heard from this, shehikri Avraham Avinu lishmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Avraham made others call out in the name of Hashem, bepeh kol over v'shav, in the mouth of everybody who would come by. How was this? Ketzad lechar shachlu v'shatu. Right, he would constantly have guests over, and after they ate and drank, they got up to thank him and to bless him. And then Abraham would say to them, did you eat from my food? Mishel Elohei Olam achaltem. You ate from God's food, the God of the universe. Hodu v'shibchu u'baruchu l'mi she'amar v'haya ha'olam. He told everybody to praise and to bless the one who said and created the world, meaning the food is from God, and that's the only being that you should be thanking for all of this and not me. And from this, we see from this one little midrash, but the truth is, if we look into Abraham's character, it was so clear that Abraham was always getting everybody involved, meaning that exactly what Abraham is about. When it says that they left, right, and they took with them, he and Sarah took the nefesh asher asu b'charan. Was it their servants, or was it people that they made closer to Hashem? Or maybe it was both. It was servants that they had, that they made closer to Hashem. But either way, Abraham was calling in the name of Hashem, meaning constantly getting other people to recognize. Even with this with the incident that we're talking about in terms of the bull and bringing in the guests, Abraham gets his family very involved. I mean, he doesn't do this on his own. He also doesn't tell his servants to treat his guests instead. He's the main waiter there. And he comes into the house and he gets all excited. He tells Sarah, Lushiva got, and he takes his na'ar, meaning he takes his only son at that point, Ishmael, in order to get the meat and to prepare the food. And he gets everybody involved. We see this when we see the parallel view of Lot, who also invites guests, but does everything on his own, right? Chazal tell us even his wife wasn't willing to give any salt over to the guests. But not only that, he just does everything by himself. Like, he doesn't get his daughters, who he almost sacrifices, involved. He doesn't get anybody involved. He just does it himself. And Abraham was the person who got everybody involved, called out in the name of Hashem, made others call out in the name of Hashem, made others recognize God. Seeming if we go back to this idea of the bulls on Chag HaSukkot, and the bull being resembling Avraham Avinu, we also are trying to do something very, very similar on Chag HaSukkot. We are trying to put as many bulls on the altar in the beginning to try to, dafka on Chag HaSukkot, bring all the other nations to recognize God, and as the Mikdash is the place not just for Am Yisrael, but for all the other nations also to recognize God. And we're starting with like tons of Avraham vibes, and as we get less and less, because the expectation is that throughout the days of Sukkot, we'll have more and more people already involved, and we'll need it less on the altar. Okay, taking this and trying to bring it back into the days of Chag Chanuka. Okay, so go back to the very beginning and to Beit Shamai's view of Kneged Parei HaChag. Okay, so Beit Shamai says the Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin is Pochet Veholech, right? We start with 8, Yom Rishon Madlik Shmona, and every single day we get less and less. And if we take that same view in terms of what is done with Avraham and what is done with the Parim, seemingly that's exactly what we're doing. We're starting really, really strong with tons of light, and every day gets a little bit less and less. And the reason for this is because hopefully there's going to be a lot more light outside. And the expectation is that that's what's happening with Chag Chanuka, that if you first start lighting a ton, and you light with the 8 candles in the beginning, and then you hope that the light on the outside, meaning that we were able to bring in so much light into everybody's home, so that every day it just gets when we ourselves in our private home light less every day. It's because we expect that already in the outside world, this is something that's just getting much, much greater. Meaning outside, there's more and more light, not just physical light in terms of people, the days getting longer, but it being contagious. People seeing that light, noticing it, and getting it more and more. I guess the same question we asked on Beit Hillel, we could also ask on Beit Shammai, and I think give a similar answer. We could also ask, wait, why are we starting with 8 with the Mahadrim Mina Mahadrim and going less and less? Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai could have agreed that we could just start with 8 and just keep going strong the whole time. But I think that message of having things dynamic, of having things change whether it means that internally we're bringing more and more light, or that it means that we hope that externally there'll be more light outside, and therefore we're getting less and less. Either way, we need this to be dynamic. We need this to be shedding light somewhere. We ourselves are bringing more and more light, so we hope that's contagious. Or we're bringing in a ton of light and then showing everybody that we can make less and less because the world is getting brighter. Either way, it's something that we're hoping will be dynamic. I think that's also true and hoping and blessing that this is what our Hanukkah should be like this year and every year, that it should just get brighter. This whole 24 hours of Torah is called Ma'afela Le'ora, really coming from a darker place into a place of light. And I think it's very appropriate for this holiday and for the month of Kislev to be thinking about how we just add light all the time into our lives. And there's something special about it also being particularly dynamic, about something that we can constantly try to be adding a little bit more, whether it's us in particular in our personal lives, trying to add a little bit more, maybe a little more Torah, something we can learn a little bit more, maybe a little more tefillah, maybe a little more tehillah, maybe a little more chesed, something that we can do that is just better in our lives, or something that we can help get the world to be a little brighter, a little bit lighter, and to be able to cause others maybe to bring that light. And hopefully, there's lots of Hashem that should be what this Hanukkah is all about. I'm going to summarize just for a minute different things that we saw and explain. So we started with, this is just a quick summary of basically what we said. We started with the famous question of lighting candles on Chanuka, that we all, thank God, today do the mahadrin min hamadrin, and we try to do the best of the best in enhancing this, beautifying this mitzvah as most as possible, and therefore being dynamic with our lights and with our candles, whether that means more and more or less and less, and obviously we go by Beit Hillel halachically, and we all add to the lights on Hanukkah. But like I started with, I think it's really, really important that we understand a view that we don't take halachically, and whenever there's a dispute, that's like the most important thing, I think. I have that sometimes with my children, that when we're learning Mishnah, it's like there's Rabbi Eliezer and there's Rabbi Yeshua, and then the question is, so who's right? And of course, that's not the question. It might be a question of who we go by halachically, but it's for sure not a question of who's right, because it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of being able to listen to another person, another view, a view that's not ours, and be able to explain it and understand it in a way that it could have been our view, even if we don't necessarily agree with it. So in this case, we examined a little more Beit Shamai. We saw Beit Hillel's view pretty clearly in terms of constantly going up in Kedusha, something that I think nobody disagrees with. Whenever you have something that's holy, we have to continuously be growing in holiness. I think it's very obvious that Beit Shammai also agree with that. One thing that we saw that was Beit Shammai's view was particularly on trying to replicate what we did on Chag HaSukkot when we had the Beit HaMikdash, and how we took different sacrifices, and it takes the ones that are supposed to be like resembling Abraham, the bulls, and just like it keeps going down, we take the lights on Chanuka, and we start really strong and go down and down. What we explained was that starting strong and going down, it just means that we added more light into this world, that we added more good into this world, we added more light into this world. And by going down, it's not because we're subtracting light, it's because our light had such an impact and effect on other people that we needed it less. And that's my bracha to us all, that we should all just need it less, Amir Hashem, this Chag and every Chag, and that we should just be able to bring in so much more or and light into times of darkness, and all this incredible Torah learning and this Beit Midrash and Nishmat and in all the places in the world that I know are really, really studying Torah and doing so much chesed as much as they can, to all be for the Hatzlacha, the Chayalim, and all the people who are here risking their lives for Am Yisrael, everybody in whatever place they're at and wherever they can be, just as much as possible, that we should just be tefillah for a very special Chanuka and a very special holiday, and for days that are Bezrat Hashem full of peace and no more war, just good in this world. Bezrat Hashem.